For us Floridians, particularly here in South Florida, this center should also feel closer to heart. Maybe many of you don't know why I'm saying that, but the genesis of this center actually started a few miles away from where we are right now. In the city of Hollywood, at the Hollywood Mall, back in 1981, when a little boy, Adam Walsh, was kidnapped from a Sears department store and then later killed. The parents, the Walshes, turned this unfortunate event into the best thing that has happened for children in this country. This center that is second to none, a resource of immense opportunities, a real treasure for those who want to combat human trafficking, particularly as it involves children. And who else but Mr. Callahan Walsh, who is already famous in his own right, no matter that he's the son of probably America's favorite crime chaser. For me, he is John Walsh. And we are so grateful that you are here with us today for the amazing work that you do at the center, and I'll ask you to tell us something about that, but also for being so active in the media and everywhere throughout the country, sharing your story, sharing your experience, and enlightening us with skills and knowledge that we all need to be able to help children. So, thank you so very much for being here with us today, Mr. Walsh.
My pleasure.
And I mentioned just a couple of words, but I'm sure that many around here don't know much about the story. So maybe you can just recap a little bit what exactly happened back in 1981. And then, if you could tell us, how did, as a sibling, growing up in this family, what was the experience? I mean, hard we could say, but it's really good to hear from you.
Back in 1981, missing and exploited children's issues weren't on the forefront of everyone's mind. It was an issue that we saw a little bit of. There were some famous cases. Eton Paths from New York City is one. But when my brother was kidnapped in 1981, my parents were very quick to realize that law enforcement was inept at looking for missing children, and there was no national response for missing children and no place for them to turn to provide resources to parents of missing children. The police did a great job. I mean, they did as best as they could. They just lacked the training, they lacked the resources, they lacked the information when it came to missing children's issues. In fact, they didn't want to start looking for Adam until 48 hours after he disappeared, stating he could be a runaway. This was a 6-year-old child who had never walked home from school, who was at a Sears department store with his mother, who was ushered out of the store by an undertrained security guard. My mother and him went to the store to purchase a lamp. As they walked in, Adam saw a big video game cabinet, the arcade cabinets that they used to have. Video games were brand new back in 1981. And he asked my mother if he could stop and watch the 4 boys who were playing that game. There was 2 African-American boys and 2 boys, I believe, from Argentina who were playing. My mother said, "Okay, you can stay here, watch them play. I'm going to be 1 aisle over. Don't go anywhere." Well, she comes back to look for him, and he's nowhere to be found. It wasn't until years later that we found out that that security guard had ushered all of the boys out of the store because of an argument between the older teens playing the video game, assumed Adam was with some of those kids, and when ushered out of the store, he was left on the curb by himself, where he was picked up by a child predator named Otis Toole. And so during that search, Adam's remains weren't found until 2 weeks later near Vero Beach, a couple hundred miles away from where he was originally abducted. And during that time, my parents were, as any parents would be, in the most frantic situation that they could imagine. It was a nightmare come to life. But what made it worse was that there was nobody there to help them. There was no organization to help them put together a poster distribution, to hook them up with national resources. There was no federal response to this type of case. In fact, the FBI even turned down entering Adam's case into the NCIC, which was new at the time. They had race cars and stolen race horses, but they refused to enter a stolen child into that system. While law enforcement, we may have been a thorn in their side in the beginning, now law enforcement is our strongest ally. And we work hand in hand with law enforcement on a regular basis. Everything that we do is there to help law enforcement recover missing children and end exploitation where we find it. So law enforcement, both on the local, state, and federal levels, are a huge part of what we do. In fact, we have many federal liaisons that have desks and offices at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We're headquartered up in Washington, D.C., and we've worked very hard to earn those partnerships and that trust, to have those individuals, men and women from those organizations, FBI agents, marshals agents, coming in, taking their jackets off, sitting down next to one another and sharing resources, bearing the hatchet, but sharing resources with our case managers and with each other to make sure. I think there's one issue they can all agree on, it's protecting children. And so we've worked very hard to make sure that we can bring in those federal partners to do everything we can. And that's why I want to thank you all as well for attending, because at the National Center, we know we don't operate in a bubble. This isn't something that we can do on our own. We have to share resources. We have to share information. We have to come to each other's trainings and make sure that we're all doing the right thing when it comes to this issue, because it is so big and so pervasive. So I do want to thank all of you for attending. But back in 1981, we didn't have that 24-hour news cycle either when it came to reporting on what the Kardashians are wearing this week or whatnot. And so to get a missing child on national media was very difficult. I mean, you had the nightly news and maybe a few local news agencies here and there, but we just didn't have the 24-hour cable news cycle like we do. And so my parents did everything that they could to try to get Adam's case out there. They attended morning shows, Good Morning America, all sorts of shows, traveling around the country, testifying in front of Congress, multiple times, trying to change legislation in favor of children and victims. And one of the visits to Washington, D.C., they asked the taxi driver to take him to the Children's Building because they needed to make some photocopies of some documents that they had. And he couldn't. And it wasn't because he didn't know where it was or because it was too far away. It was because it didn't exist. You had so many other groups. You had the National Realtors Association and all these special interest groups up in D.C. and no organization for children. As many of you know, it takes money to get stuff done in D.C., and children aren't donating to their favorite charity or nonprofit organization. And so my parents went back to Florida, and they were receiving letter after letter. The Hollywood post office estimated they received over 40,000 pieces of mail to their home. Many people around the country sending their condolences over Adam, but many parents of other missing children whose cases were not getting the same attention that Adam's got. We know the media tends to focus on the blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids, and not many of the others, unfortunately. And so many of the cases that we see at the National Center are children from underserved communities and need to get the same attention that all the other children are receiving. And that's how we deal with it at the National Center. There's no case where we're shoveling more resources over here or there. Every child deserves a safe childhood, and we're trying to make sure that happens at the National Center. So my parents started what originally was the Adam Walsh Resource Center in their garage off just a card table and a landline, which has grown into the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children when Ronald Reagan allowed for grant funding to our organization. We became the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, an organization that's just celebrating its 35th anniversary. We have branch offices around the country, of course, headquartered in D.C., about 350 employees full-time, but an organization that's helped recover over 290,000 missing children. So, it's something that I grew up with my parents saying, we need to make sure Adam didn't die in vain. And if his song is to continue, then we must do the singing. And we're trying to do that every day at the National Center in his honor. And at the same time, while my mother started this organization in her garage, my father went out there to try to catch other criminals and try to get justice for families that haven't gotten it. Because it took 27 years to get justice in Adam's case. It took 27 years before the Hollywood police would admit the mistakes that they made. A new chief came in, he reopened the files and allowed some outside expertise to come in. In 3 months, they solved the case. Otis Toole at the time was deceased. He had died in prison, was in prison for similar charges and had died. And Chief Wagner had said if Otis Toole were alive today at the press conference, he would be charged unequivocally with the murder and kidnapping of Adam Walsh. So justice doesn't bring closure. Closure is a word we don't use. Nothing will bring back your loved one, but it does help in the healing process. And I think being able to provide that to so many other families through America's Most Wanted, a show that caught over 1,400 criminals, worst of the worst, in 31 different countries, provided justice to families that hadn't gotten it. And I think that really not only filled a hole in my father's heart, but I think allowed him to provide that justice to these families that were so desperate to get it. And I think, you know, some of the younger folks in the audience might go, John Walsh, I thought he was just like a soap opera star that became a crime fighter. There is something behind that, and it's the story of my brother. And I'm just honored to be able to follow in my parents' footsteps. My father has huge shoes to fill. The work that's done at the National Center. I work with some amazing people. As you mentioned, Stacey Sheehan is here. I implore all of you to try to get a couple minutes with her if you can, because she is a rock star at our organization. She is the executive director of our case analysis division. You know, we have two sides of the house, right? We have our missing and our exploited. And she was one of the first to recognize that some of our folks in our exploited children's division who were dealing with certain cases of sex trafficked victims were the same children that some of our case managers in our missing children's division were looking for. And she's connecting the dots going, hey, there's a bigger issue here, and was the one who spearheaded our work into the sex trafficking realm at the National Center. So again, I implore you guys to get a couple minutes with her if you can. She does have a track later today, so I'm really glad that she's here with me.
And we are so happy that both of you are here. May I just revisit a question I had? How did it feel growing up in a household like that? I just can't imagine, but at the same time, I just see now the direction that your life has taken. What is it that you're doing? Is that the experience? I mean, the answer probably, short answer would be yes, but hearing from you a little bit more, it would be really needed here. Yeah,
growing up in a household like that is not easy. But I think my parents made the best of a bad situation. I think most of you might think, oh, you know, if my first child were to go missing, I would never let my other children out of the house.
You have siblings, right?
I do. Yeah. I have a younger brother and an older sister, and that wasn't the case. My parents understood that we were children. We needed to have a childhood. They weren't going to lock us away. But they believe prevention is key as well. So we were taught all the safety lessons that we still teach at the National Center today. We have 2 great programs. I'm sure I'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit later. So, you know, having my parents sit down, have these safety conversations, but at the same time, I knew about my brother Adam. It's not something that, you know, as a teen or something, they sat me down and dropped a bombshell on me. I grew up knowing I had a brother that was taken. We celebrated his life. We celebrated his birthday. I knew his favorite sports and movies, baseball and Star Wars. And we celebrated this young boy and made sure that, again, that he didn't die in vain, that I watched my parents channel their anger, their emotions over Adam's death and try to do something about it. My father used to end every show at America's Most Wanted with "You can make a difference," and that's something I truly believe. I feel very privileged that I look up to my father. I know not everybody can say that. It's very unfortunate. I'm very fortunate that I can say that. I do look up to my father as a role model and someone who I believe says something like that and means it. He's a shining example of one person can make a difference. And I think that's what everybody here is doing today. And I know there's some nursing students here, some future healthcare professionals, and oftentimes, I think the public may think you're not part of this issue, but you're oftentimes the one who can spot it first, and you're oftentimes the ones who can get the child separated from their exploiter and really be able to dig down. So I really appreciate you students here today. but growing up in that household, I just saw my parents doing what they thought was best in this case, and me volunteering at a very young age at the National Center, at the branch office we have in West Palm Beach. I was, crawling around on the ground. They're picking paper clips out of my mouth as a little boy. I think I've licked enough envelopes to last me a lifetime. It's something that I always thought I would be a part of. I was a producer for my father on America's Most Wanted for a number of years, helped co-create his last show, The Hunt, and that's when I made my jump over to the National Center full time. I always knew I'd be there, I just didn't know when. And for me, it's an honor to be able to work there and continue the mission that they started, and to work with some great colleagues that I have at that organization.
You just mentioned that, so you now work for the National Center on Missing and Exploiting Children. Can you just tell a little bit what is it you do, but at the same time, what kind of, or better say, what are the trends that you now actually see, particularly as it relates to child sex trafficking?
So at the National Center, sort of a jack of all trades, master of none, maybe, an ambassador for the organization, a spokesperson, of course, but I also, in outreach and prevention. That's actually what I started doing when I first came to the organization. That's something I don't think I'll ever stop doing. I do believe prevention is key. We have some great programs. I'm always happy sharing those with the public. So talking about that sort of stuff, media is another big part of what I do, and using those prevention education tips and providing those to parents. I do a lot of Good Morning America segments, and they'll always have great takeaways, right? They might detail a case that's in the news, but they want tips for parents. I think that's such a great outlet for it. And fundraising as well. We are a nonprofit. We do receive some federal funds, but we got to keep the door open. And I look at our federal funds as sort of a Band-Aid that covers 3/4 of the wound, right? It's great to have it, but we still need to fundraise to make sure that we're able to tackle all the issues that we see important to us. Katrina was one that we had. We didn't see coming. After Katrina, there were thousands of children who were displaced from their families. They were just put on buses or helicopters and just evacuated from that area. And they were reunited by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children with their families. And we spent a lot of our own money that wasn't grant funded. So we try to fundraise for issues like that, where we see, we need to have some money saved away for a rainy day, no pun intended. But we're actually now, because we were able to identify that, we're now written into legislation and work through FEMA. When there is a natural disaster, FEMA will provide a phone number that goes directly to our hotline to reunite missing children with their families. And so we were activated during Harvey and was it Irma in Puerto Rico, activated there as well. Luckily, those cases weren't as severe as Katrina in the sense of our displaced children. But it's really amazing thing to be able to have these issues happen and be able to make sure we're able to cover that in the future. So fundraising is a big part of my job as well. But speaking to the trends that we're seeing, a lot of it's online. That's where we're starting to get the reports that are just ramping up. Stacey, I'm sure we'll talk about our cyber tip line. Cyber tip line at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is a national reporting mechanism for all suspected sexual exploitation of children. So whether that's sexually explicit images, grooming, luring, anything like that, the cyber tip line is a place to report those incidents. And it's reported by law enforcement, parents, victims themselves, friends of victims. Those reports come in the National Center. We received about 200,000 last week and about 18 million last year alone. Now the reporting is getting better. All internet service providers are mandated to report to us through our cyber tip line, and so we get a vast amount of reports that way. But I think people, they think about child sex trafficking and they think about these issues happening in Cambodia or Thailand or these places on the other side of the world. And while, yes, they are happening there, they're happening here too. It happens in every state. It crosses all socioeconomic bounds. And we're seeing, what's happening with Jeffrey Epstein in Palm Beach, his alleged abuse. I have to say alleged, we're at a law school, right? His alleged crimes. And it's an issue that's pervasive, and it's an issue that we need to do a better job of understanding, providing comprehensive, victim-informed and trauma-based resources. We really need to get a hold on this issue. And so what we're seeing at the National Center is a ramp up of these cyber tip line reports and children who are being groomed and lured online. The internet has created life for the better in so many ways, but it's created so many new ways to harm children as well. The different social media or social messaging apps that we see, it's like whack-a-mole. One pops up and kids flock to it, and then parents kind of start getting savvy about that one, and then there's another one that comes up right behind it, or two or three. And so, it's just so difficult for parents, especially because the knowledge gap is so severe when it comes to online issues. Many parents didn't grow up with the internet. And so for them to be able to understand, fully comprehend how these social messaging or social media platforms operate and how to protect their children while they're on them can be very difficult, because the parents, many of them, just don't understand how they work. And so what we're seeing at the National Center is an increase in grooming and luring of these children through these platforms into the sex trafficking world. Many of these kids are promised monetary, items, phones, clothing, jewelry, luring them from the home, promises of love and affection. Many girls think they're going right into the arms of a new boyfriend, and it's into the arms of a sexual predator. And so, being able to identify those trends at our organization and really pull out some qualitative information out of all of that data that we receive is so important. That's why we have to be so tech heavy. I mean, we are so reliant on our tech partners to be able to crunch the numbers and cases that we have at the National Center. It's just so important that we continue to be able to identify and sort of weed through all the information that comes and really be able to pull out the really important information.
In various media appearances that you have, but also as you're talking here, you mentioned prevention and education as very important tools, and I happen to believe that actually these are so important. You heard me talk about it. What does the center do as it relates to prevention and education on trafficking, particularly child trafficking, child sex trafficking? And what would you suggest, what would be the ways to actually be able to prevent it? So if you're just here, look, these people are interested in curbing trafficking, ending it, what would be your advice, and centers as well? Well,
I think we both agree prevention is so important, and that's what we believe wholeheartedly at the National Center. We have two incredible programs. One is called Kid Smarts. The other one is called Net Smarts. Kid Smarts is real-world safety, so that's walking to or from school, or school-related activity, personal safety, personal touch, things like that. That's our Kid Smarts program. That's that's geared towards kids who are in kindergarten through 5th grade. We really try to aim that program to educators. They're seeing a lot more children than some parents are, but it's a great program that parents can use as well. Through different 3D animated videos, we teach kids the 4 rules of personal safety, which is check first, take a friend, tell people no, and tell a trusted adult.
When you say we teach kids, where? Do you have like programs with schools, or
Absolutely.
How does it work?
Yeah, in schools is the best way to do it. In fact, we just rolled out a training with the Palm Beach County School Board. They are now providing the Net Smarts program to all schools in in Palm Beach County, which is the 10th largest school district in the nation that's serving over 200,000 children. So school resource officers, after the Parkland shooting, as you may know, a school resource officer is now assigned to every school in Florida. And so we have our SROs out there delivering the Net Smarts program, which is a great way for those SROs to build a rapport with these students, a great program that's free for anybody to use it, but especially great for these school resource officers to be able to take these presentations into the classroom, into the assembly. We provide great presentations that are editable, they're designed beautifully, and they come with speaker's notes as well. So we really try to create a complete package and make it as easy as possible for either an educator or a school resource officer to enter these into their existing curriculum and teach kids how to make safe and smart decisions.
Are the children listening? I realize that but my child is grown up, he's a man now, but I talk with my niece and nephew, and honestly, no matter that I think I know so much on trafficking and I talk to them, I don't think they are listening to me, though. Are they listening to you as to whoever else is talking?
It's tough, teaching safety in school is never the coolest topic, right? I mean, I've been doing it for a long time, and you have to make it fun. For the youngest kids, we do 3D animated videos that look like Pixar or DreamWorks, something like, they would already be watching on a Saturday morning already. It's kind of like sticking vitamins in the junk food, right? We've got these animated, they're cartoons, but they've got some great safety messages in them. And we provide resources and activities and even video games that help drive home those lessons. But for the older kids, it's even harder. For our 14 to 17-year-olds, that's the group that's the hardest to get across to. They think they're too cool for this type of stuff. And so what we do is what we call our real-life stories, and that's where we bring a teenage victim to our organization. We have them tell their story in their own voice, and then we put a visual element to that story. We're not showing the victim's face. We're putting some sort of visual. It could be video or animation or what have you. But it definitely has a more adult feel to it. And when children of that age hear these stories from their peers, it's a lot more impactful, and it really goes a long way. And so we really try, we do our work in our focus groups and really try to create the best resources we can, but that's really what I find to work the best for those ages. And so that's why it's important that our program, especially the NetSmarts program, which is our online safety program, has been around since 2001. The internet looks vastly different now than it did. Those resources are all age appropriate. So what the youngest kids see is different than the tweens, and then the teens get even more, because the conversation changes too. What you're talking to your youngest child about online safety is not revealing too much information and not telling people your address or your real name. Then it starts getting into, specific content, inappropriate content, and it gets into not meeting people who you've met online in the real world. And as these children age up, that conversation changes. And that's one of my tips for parents that I always talk about. Have ongoing conversations with your kids about safety, because it's so difficult for a parent to just jump in, and they've never talked to their child about it, and all of a sudden their child's 16 and they're trying to have that talk with them, on the couch, that awkward conversation. If you start young and start and do it often, you can really have that safety conversation be part of the dinner conversation and a casual conversation. And I say have continued because that conversation changes. What you're telling your youngest not to do is very different than the issues that your teen and tween is having online. So I always tell parents, know the technology. That's downloading that app or that social media platform yourself, learning how that works, and friending your child so you can see what's happening in their feed. They might not like it, but tough. Setting ground rules and sticking to them, and then having ongoing conversations with your kids about safety. Those are the 3 tips that I always give parents.
Thank you. You just mentioned that it's good that parents should revisit the topic continuously. How about schools? What have you seen in schools? So how does it work? Just walk us kind of how you work with schools. I tell you why I'm mentioning this. When a few years ago, we do a lot of outreach as well with the Academy. We had the hardest time to convince school principals and to do some work on trafficking. Let's ask the parents, is it appropriate, is it so? So it was really tough. We managed, ultimately, but it's hard. And I always think, okay, we talked once, what next? Yeah. So have you established partnerships with schools, or how does it work? We have. I think what makes our program, our NetSmarts program, a little bit more palatable for some schools is the program is robust in the sense that it doesn't deal with just one issue. We look at this program as not just online safety, but digital citizenship. And so we're talking everything from the inappropriate content to cyberbullying as well, and anti-sex trafficking issues in there also. So instead of just coming to school saying, hey, we're just going to teach your kid anti-sex trafficking issues, here's a program that they can take on that has many of those issues covered in one program. And so I think that's helpful. We see many schools don't take it on until they've had an incident, which is unfortunate. So much so that we created a resource last year called I Sent a Sext, Now What? Because so many times you can go blue in the face telling kids, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. Oftentimes parents, educators, law enforcement doesn't find out till after it's already happened, right? And so we created a resource called I Sent a Sext, Now What? It's a 2-page, it's a 1-pager, but it's double-sided. And it's sort of damage control for parents and educators to say, okay, this incident's already happened. What are your next steps? And so we see that with a lot of schools where they won't reach out until something's already happened, and that's really unfortunate. So
What we do, we have a presentation that is for parents and communities as well, and we'll often send our outreach coordinators to these schools to provide a presentation to the principal or whoever there's that making decisions in that realm, and tell them, show them the program, the resources that it comes with, letting them know, hey, this is a free program of the National Center. It's research-based. We've been studying attempted abductions for over a decade. We've been studying this issue for quite some time as well. And we're able to put that information, have research-based information in these programs. And we've realized it is difficult to go school to school. And so we have a larger strategy where we try to roll out into full jurisdictions, either, county-wide, statewide. That's so helpful when you get a large rollout like that. And we also have the train-the-trainer model. We can't be at every school and go to classroom, one classroom, one assembly at a time. And so, training is a huge part of what we do at the National Center, and training community leaders and educators and school resource officers to be able to train their colleagues to bring these programs into their schools is very helpful.
Let's just shift for a moment into kind of the nitty-gritty details of what the National Center does. Let's say a child finds himself in one of those horrific situations talk about. What next? Can you just tell us the center, what does the center do?
Yeah, every case is different, and so the resources that are provided change case by case. But it's something that we saw where children would go missing and then they would become exploited. And what is so unfortunate is many of the children who are groomed and lured online by these sexual predators, they're categorized as a runaway. Because they're leaving the home on their own volition. And as you know, the media doesn't look at runaways the same they do from a stranger abducted child. But we call them endangered runaways because they are endangered. These kids who are running away from home, either into the streets or into the arms of these predators, they're not leaving with their birth certificate and social security card ready to go get a job. Oftentimes, many of them are too young to even get a job. And so they're especially vulnerable to these type of predators. We know at the National Center that 1 in 7 runaways is likely a victim of child sex trafficking, and 88% of those are out of the care of the state. These are foster kids who run away. These kids have very little support system and are very susceptible to this type of abuse. And that number could be worse because we can only tell you what is reported to us. We know many older teen males who run away are never reported missing. We know many children who are part of the LGBT community who may have had an issue at home and are forced from the home aren't reported by their parents missing either, and they're especially susceptible to this type of abuse as well. And so at the National Center, we try to provide law enforcement and help law enforcement find these children, to recover them. We help in the reunification of these children with their families. Some of these families can't afford a reunification. A child may be found states away on the other side of the country, and we'll work with our transportation partners to make sure that we can pay for that reunification, and to also provide services for these survivors after recovery, because it's such a long road ahead of them. They've been, depending on how long they've been trafficked, they may have missed years of school, doctor's appointments, dentists. They don't have the skills to often get a job right back into society. And of course, there's plenty of mental health resources that are needed as well. And so what we try to do is find a network of healthcare professionals around the country, because we don't have branch offices everywhere. We can't be everywhere at all times. To our family advocacy division looks for these group of individuals who are willing to provide resources to these victims, and we try to hook them up with the local resources in their area. And that's why, again, for many of you that are here that are the boots on the ground, that's why it's so important. At the National Center, we're kind of at this 30,000-foot view, working with law enforcement, trying to get these recoveries, but that long-term support for these families is often done through the local work, that boots on the ground, those sort of more grassroots organizations. And so it's so important, as I always say, to share this information and work together to try to find a solution for these issues.
Are there any, I don't know if I can ask this question, are there any favorite partners you have in South Florida? since most of us here probably are South Floridians.
Well, Christy from Christy's Cause is here, and she's one of our star organizations. She does some great work in the Naples area, and a great example of boots on the ground, a dedicated person who just has thrown herself into this issue to try to help local girls in her area. And so, hats off to Christy. Familiar face here, was just at her training. When was that? Just a few months ago. In May, yeah, and over on the West Coast. I don't always get over there to the West Coast of the state, but Christy's been a good friend for a number of years now. So it's building those relationships and finding the folks that are really the ones in the communities dealing with the victims post-recovery that we're able to provide the best care possible.
I know that the audience probably have questions to pose to you, but one more question. So you have a show now, In Pursuit with John Walsh. Can you just tell us a little bit about it? Maybe, I don't know, can you give us some insight?
Sure.
Some of your memorable cases?
Yeah, sure. So I was a producer for my father's show, America's Most Wanted, which I know many of you are familiar with. And I helped co-create his last show, The Hunt. And I, as a producer for the show, I used to produce, first I started in post-audio and then worked my way up to line producer and would produce my father's stand-up, so the parts where you just see him standing up in front of the camera. Those were actually easier shoots. And then I started doing the full recreations, 60-person crews, camera, lighting, extras, actors, stunt coordinators, stunt drivers. It was chaos. It's a lot of work. We did, in the last year of America's Most Wanted, we did 44 one-hour episodes and 4 two-hour specials in a year, and that's more television than anybody should be producing. And I got burnt out. I was done with television. I made my way over to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and I was starting to become a spokesperson for the organization, starting to do interviews. I was camera shy when I was a producer for the show. I wanted nothing to do with being on camera. I wanted to be a director. I wanted to be a producer. And it was when I made my way over to the National Center, they said, "Hey, how would you like to be our spokesperson?" I go, "Oh gosh, okay." I figured I'd start doing a couple local news interviews. First interview that I did was Good Morning America live at Times Square. Shaking in my boots, the whole time. I guess I did something right because they keep asking me to come back. But started gaining more experience and becoming more comfortable in front of the camera. And my father, who should be retired by now, but refuses to give up, decided to start it up again. And he was in conversations with Investigation Discovery. Henry Schleif, who runs the channel, was a good friend of his. He started Court TV, and they have a long history. And he asked my father to start a new show, and it was actually Henry's idea and Discovery's idea to bring me on. And to have me become sort of a field correspondent. My father's getting older. He doesn't want to travel as much, so I'm the new one out there, living out of hotels and out of airports and all that. But I'm honored to be able to join my father. I mean, huge shoes to fill. But similar to America's Most Wanted, going out and profiling wanted fugitives, we wrapped our first season just a few months ago. Our very first fugitive that we profiled was a guy named Luis Frias. He was separated from his wife, Jeanette Reyna, who was a law enforcement officer and also the director of the Ponca Tribe of Oklahoma's Domestic Violence Center. They were separated, and he had his mother lure Jeanette and the 3 kids to the grandmother's house, saying, "I know you're separated from my son, but Grandma wants to see the kids." She shows up with the kids, and Luis Frias is there waiting for her, pulls her into the apartment, stabs her 41 times in front of the 3 children. He takes off, leaves his mother behind, who wound up getting arrested. He takes off to Mexico. He's the first fugitive that we profile on the new show, and a viewer in Mexico spots him, calls the hotline. We send 2 U.S. Marshals down there who hook up with 2 undercover DEA agents. They spot the guy, are able to arrest him, and the Oklahoma State Police gave Jeanette Reyna's state-issued handcuffs to those U.S. Marshals, and they slapped those handcuffs on his wrists and brought him back to the United States for extradition. And if that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. So we got, and he was a top 15 U.S. Marshals, or he was U.S. Marshals top 15 wanted guy, and he was our very first capture. It works. The power of the public is so important. Law enforcement oftentimes, they hit a dead end in some of these investigations, and there's new crimes that are coming up that they have to investigate. And so it's so important when a case goes cold to be able to reach out to the public and shine a white-hot spotlight on these guys. Nobody wants to be living next to these dirtbags. And so, being able to showcase these individuals on the show to get justice for families that haven't gotten it. And we've also partnered with the National Center. We're showcasing 2 missing children every episode as well to try to recover some of the cases that we have at the National Center. Luckily, we got a go for season 2, so we start filming in September, and looking forward to catching some more guys and providing this justice to these families. I often meet, as sort of my job on the show, I go out in the field and I meet with local investigators and U.S. Marshals and the families as well, and talk to them. It's something I can relate. I can empathize with these families, and it's just so important for them to be able to try to get justice for their loved ones and try to put an end to that horrible chapter in their life.
Fascinating work and valuable as well. So thank you for sharing all of this. Well, questions? We don't know whether it's loud enough for everybody to hear, so maybe better on the microphone.
It's okay. Hello. Okay. So my name is Amanda, I'm a nursing student here at St. Thomas. I just wanted to ask, based off your professional opinion, at what age do you think it's appropriate for a child to understand the responsibility of being a part of social media, like Instagram? Just because I know that there's a couple of adults, like parents, that ask themselves that question. When is my child capable of understanding the importance of security when you're online?
I think as soon as the child is on those devices, that's when you should start those conversations. But it's important to remember, when you're talking to young children, you need to make sure that the way you're talking to them is easy for them to understand, easy for them to remember, use simple messaging, and not to be fear-based. It's not about scaring that child away from these devices. It's about empowering them with safe and smart decision-making, because the majority of the time, it's the child that is going to be the one that makes that decision. The parents can't always be over the child's shoulder, looking at every website that they visit, looking at every social interaction that they have. A parent needs to prepare the child for any path that child might find themselves on. So start early, start often, but do it in a way that is understandable for that child, and so they can understand the issues that you're talking about. And those conversations then ramp up as the child gets older and more mature. So do the conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you for everything that you and the agency does in helping children. On your website, is there any information that is age sensitive for, I'm thinking about my granddaughter. I am. She's 8 years old, and I'm saying, wait a minute, I would love to start introducing human trafficking education to her. And my husband and I do go out into the public schools, and we do educate the high schoolers and middle schoolers on human trafficking, but not elementary school. And I'm just sitting here listening to you, thinking about her. Do you have anything on your website?
We do. At missingkids.org, you can go up to our education tab, and you'll see 3 programs: Code Atom, Kid Smarts, and Net Smarts. Kid Smarts is the real world safety. Net Smarts is the online safety. But Kid Smarts is geared for kindergarten through 5th grade,
Okay.
and it does deal with personal touch
Awesome.
and things like that. So while we don't talk to these kids about we don't use the term sex trafficking with the younger children, we
right.
do talk about personal touch, and if someone touches you inappropriately, how to respond, who to go to in situations like that. We actually don't teach stranger danger anymore at the National Center.
Okay.
You know, it was easy to teach kids that, right? It's a rhyming phrase, you know, but child safety is so much more nuanced than that. And so we use the 4 rules of personal safety, and that helps cover us in those situations of suspected child sex trafficking, because many times for those youngest kids who are being sex trafficked, they're sleeping in their own bed at night. You know, these aren't kids who've been abducted. These kids are being exploited by somebody that they know. And so that's why it's so important for parents to focus on that, not necessarily that strangers are the evil people.
Right.
Now, when a child is abducted by a stranger, it is a very serious situation, and parents need to talk to their children about going anywhere with an adult that they don't know or accepting anything, because we know from our analysis of attempted abductions, the lures are still the same. It's still, help me look for a lost puppy, I've got candy, those sort of things. And so it's important that parents talk to their children about that, and the 4 rules of personal safety covers that. But in an emergency situation, let's say they are abducted by an uncle, a family friend, a relative, it's often a stranger that will come to their aid. And so they need to be able to identify a trusted adult and when and who to ask for help from. And so the Kid Smarts program is a great resource for teaching children how to make those safe and smart decisions. Again, all those resources are free and available at missingkids.org.
Okay. I know that you work very closely with law officials. Do you see anything coming down the line regarding buyers? There is such a demand, and as we continue to have this demand of the buyers, it makes it that much harder to try and stop what we're trying to work so hard for, this human trafficking.
You're right, and I think law enforcement is always aimed towards the seller, which is not the easy get, but that's the obvious, right? But you don't supply something if there's no demand. And the demand is by the buyers. And so seeing law enforcement crack down more on the buyers is something that we applaud at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We need to tackle this issue at all angles. So, you know, when we're starting to see the crackdown of the buyers, in fact, you know, we're seeing virtual sex trafficking where the abuse is happening in other countries and people are paying for access to a live stream. And so even cracking down on those buyers is something that we think will help eradicate this issue.
Any other questions?
Sir, Mr. Walsh, pardon me if I missed this, but is there training aimed at addressing the faith-based community, such as churches, for a faith-based person or group?
We don't have a training specifically for faith-based organizations, but we do work with many faith-based organizations. We provide these resources like the Kid Smarts program or the Net Smarts program to many after-school and Sunday school organizations, many churches that we work with, because we know churches have a lot of kids that are there and they're learning about the Bible and they're learning about the teachings of Jesus, and they're there learning and they're absorbing all that information, and you know, we care so much about those young children. It's a great setting to talk to them about these safety protocols. And so, yes, we do work with many faith-based organizations. We don't have one specific, but our presentations can absolutely be used in those organizations without editing or re-engineering or anything like that. And any technical assistance that you require on those programs, you're more than welcome to reach out to the National Center, and a outreach coordinator will walk you through all the resources that we have available, how to implement them, and where to sort of navigate onto the site to find that information. So.
On your behalf as well, I want to thank you so very much, Mr. Walsh, for being here with us.
Thank you.
And the Center for the amazing work that you do. And I guess also greetings to Mr. Walsh, Senior. Thank you so very much, and God's blessings for you.
Thank you for having me.